Baruch
atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher yishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzitzanu la'asot b'divrei Torah.
We praise you, Lord, our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us by mitzvot and commands us to occupy ourselves in the words of Torah. Ladies, come in. It's nice and warm. Oh, here we are. It has been suggested to me that I speak into the microphone. There seems to be some difference in seems to be some difference in opinion, but I'm going to try to do it. And if I forget, now that you don't have to worry about Kleenex for me, worry about am I talking into the microphone. I forgot a few important things at home, but my wife is on the way to bring. I always have to introduce a little bit. So, remember, we're doing the agenda for the adult education says sacred dimensions of Jewish living. I have decided that this stuff comes in that proper category of sacred dimensions of Jewish living. Okay? So it's written in the Emeritus contract. He or she may interpret titles as he sees fit. So,
You burn your stripes.
that earn your stripes. And you know what stripes are also? See this, and I earn your stripes also means, in terms of Jewish law, what are stripes?
Lashes.
Lashes. So I have to be careful about remembering that. I know what you mean. Okay, here we go. We've been talking about responsa, which means trying to answer questions that the tradition could not have had answers for because it was too early. These things hadn't happened yet. Some of the differences between traditional responsa and what we have in Reform responsa. Reform responsa are advisory answers, advisory suggestions. Even those who give them don't expect that they are going to be accepted necessarily because they just have been given. Their power to convince, that's the point. Just as the responsa, the question we asked about can you read from a Holocaust Torah which is not complete, they gave a good answer, and at least I was convinced by it, and as I recall, the committees were convinced by it too, and that's now we've accepted their answer in our temple. Generally, in early traditional responsa, they were given by one scholar, one Orthodox traditional scholar. Reform responsa are given by a committee of people, a group of 20 who are considered to be quite learned, but also au courant, if that's the way you pronounce it, with contemporary society, and that they know what's going on in the Jewish world and in the rest of the world too. So they're able to weigh these things properly. And then sometimes if you get a group of 20 giving an answer to a question, you'll have a dissent, which is very Jewish, because the Talmud had a number of opinions, and even the opinions which don't carry the day in the Talmudic discussions are listed so that the next generation, just like American law, can go back and say, I like that interpret. Here's the lady with gold. Who is that lady in sunglasses? Thank you very much. No, just next to my claim.
Shouldn't be a total waste.
No, she was coming anyway.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And when I talk about how one of the issues of Jewish living is the distinction between the culture in which we're living, which we're very much a part of, and a lot of which we accept. That's our culture. It's our American culture. The distinction or the tension between that and what we think is Jewish values. Jewish values. So for example, one of the issues on tats is going to be, in a moment, how can you say that tattooing is not right when you say that ear piercing is okay? And the response on the ear piercing, I know I'll say it, ear piercing said, yes, ear piercing can be Jewishly proper, but not the other. How can you say that? And then again, how can you make a distinction between something which is necessary for health, welfare? Anyway, we'll get to that. But that's an issue of culture. Culture has accepted ear piercing, right? Oh, not for 8-year-olds. Oh, who knows what? Maybe that's it. So it's accepted that. And can you say, I accept that, but at the same time it's say no tattooing? Okay, so that's an issue. And now I will, other thing I wanted to tell you that I forgot to tell you last week. One last thing. Attitudes about how much we should be obeying tradition. How much Jewish tradition should have an influence on us. Mordecai Kaplan, it's one of Kaplan's great quotes. Mordecai Kaplan, who was essentially the founder of Reconstructionist Judaism. And Reconstructionist Judaism is, people say, well, what is it? It's somewhere between conservative and reform, but it certainly isn't Orthodox. And it isn't even conservative because Dr. Mordecai Kaplan, the founder of Reconstructionist Judaism, was teaching the first part of his career at the conservative cemetery, Jewish Theological Cemetery, and had his own small congregation.
Seminary.
Cemetery.
Freudian slip. Freudian
They
slip.
were dying to get in.
Yeah.
The right group. Thank you for not saying Freudian. Anyway, did he leave there of his own will, or was he asked to leave, or there was people didn't like what he was doing or teaching? So therefore, the Reconstructionist movement is certainly would have to be called liberal in interpretation of Jewish law. Here's what Kaplan said. The past has a vote, but not a veto. An interesting way of, not sure I altogether agree, but as a headline for an article, pretty darn good. Okay, and here we go. Ink, tats, sleeves.
What?
There's many other words too that people on the real in are using, which they haven't told us yet. Actually, there are two questions in here. One is a congregant plans reconstructive breast surgery following a radical mastectomy. Her surgeon will tattoo an areola on the reconstructed breast. She wishes to know whether this would violate the traditional Jewish prohibition against tattooing. Is there a distinction to be drawn when the when the tattooing does not occur as a result of a medical procedure? What should be our response to the phenomenon of tattooing and body piercing for the sake of adornment or self-expression? How many people would say they're fairly liberal on tattooing? How many people are not? Okay, That seems to be the majority. What about for medical purposes?
Oh, well, anything.
What about for medical purposes as described in here with the tattooing of an areola on a reconstructed breast? Yes? No? No?
Yes.
Okay. This is not a show and tell class. You need Kleenex. Do we have fun or do we have fun?
Oh, we have.
As well as good Torah. Okay, okay. And now, that you've given your answers, and now let's look at what they have to say. Orly does such a nice job on this. Errors are not. Yes, would you? Why don't you do your side of the room up to Lynn? And could you do your side of the room up to Paul?
Two and then up.
You can hand them off.
Thank you.
Well, this is from last week.
Oh, do you have,
Oh, no,
No,
it
it
is.
is.
It's the printing is the same. They're both right.
Here,
It says Shiloh, you know, so it's.
hold on. Hey, last question.
What?
Needs question.
Oh, but it said Shiloh there, so I thought it was the same from last week.
Oh, but it says tattooing.
I see the type.
Oh, tattooing.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's the right one. Kids should say, Yeshli She'ela, which means I have a question.
You always catch it. My spelling was like.
interesting, Sha'ela's question from Sha'al, I asked, Sha'alti. But tshuva is what? Is answer, but it's also repentance, it's turning around, tshuva, do tshuva. So you can see where the word has risen. Shuv, to turn back, to turn around. And here's the answer, here's the question, here's the answer. Pardon me. Okay, I will start out reading, okay? Jewish tradition would permit this surgical procedure. So we all think so too. There are, however, two reasons why one might think erroneously that it would not. The first of these is the Torah's prohibition against tattooing, the making of incisions in our skin. Where does that come from in the Torah? I will read it to you. It's not very long. Yes, is it in there?
Yeah.
Leviticus 21:28, 19:28. You?
Was that the holiness code?
Absolutely. Here we are. Here's the source of that feeling against tattooing, or early forms thereof. Well, here's the short paragraph, and you can see the context. You shall not eat anything with its blood. You shall not practice divination or soothsaying. You shall not round off the side growth on your head or destroy the side growth of your beard, like going to the. You shall not make gashes in your flesh for the dead, or incise any marks on yourselves. I am the Lord. And what might be the organizing principle behind all of those, if they are put into some recognizable category? Start out with the blood, don't eat any blood, don't shave, don't soothsay. We think all of these things were parts of Canaanite culture, Canaanite idol, I-D-O-L, worship. So this is a listing. They do it, don't do it. This is not right. This is not for Jews. That's where it comes from. That seems to be the reason, because it would be an idolatrous practice. What if you're not doing it for idolatrous purposes?
No, no worries.
That would have to be questioned. But it seems as if it's anti-idolatry. Okay.
Okay, Rabbi, excuse me. You don't eat blood, does that mean you don't eat rare meat? Is that what that infers?
Yeah.
No.
Or
From another.
or blood?
You do not eat with the blood.
Well, rare.
Of course, it has to be salted to get the blood out.
That's the kashrut thing.
It's not my major subject, so just do this. Okay. Now, I'll finish this and then somebody else will read. This prohibition, however, is understood as a preventive measure designed to separate Israel from pagan ritual, so that the making of incisions for other legitimate purposes is exempted from its terms. Thus, the Talmud and the codes permit the placing of hot ashes upon a wound. Ouch. Even though the ashes might leave a permanent tattoo-like impression upon the skin. Clear. So for the purpose of healing, you have to do it. You have to do it. Such was accepted medical treatment. Sorry. And so long as the impression is made for purposes of healing, it's clear that it is not meant as idolatrous practice. In the present case, the tattoo is an element of reconstructive surgery carried out in the wake of a mastectomy. Okay. That's pretty clear. Second reason we might think this procedure, the second reason is that we might consider this procedure an example of cosmetic surgery, talking about the incision of the extra item on the breast, of which this committee has taken a dim view. Did you know that Jewish law, even a Reformed Jewish opinion, has taken a dim view of cosmetic surgery? Let's hear it. Let's hear about it. Well, not ear piercings.
Yeah.
All of you ladies
Not if what?
and gentlemen.
All those trusted,
Gentlemen, you know what
trusted
ears.
noses.
Yeah.
the noses.
All right, let's take over, and our doubts concerning cosmetic surgery. Somebody read. Third line down.
Our doubts concerning cosmetic surgery are based upon the halachic prohibition of the causing of injury to one's body in the absence of sufficient reason. Although it is difficult to define this standard with precision,
Is it ever?
it has seemed to us that the invasive procedures involved with cosmetic surgery are justifiable only when they are part of a regime of medicine, when they contribute to what we can plausibly regard as healing. Unless it can be justified as vital to an individual's psychological and emotional well-being. Surgery designed merely to enhance a person's appearance runs counter to the message of Judaism, which admonishes us to look below the surface to concentrate upon the development of deeper and more lasting measurements of self-worth and satisfaction. Yet here too, we would find no basis upon which to counsel against the procedure described in our She'elah. This tattoo, because it's an element of reconstructive surgery, is a medical rather than purely a cosmetic procedure, and therefore is permissible against Jewish tradition.
Agree? It's just a medical procedure.
But, sort of. It's sort of medical. I mean,
You can live without it.
you can, but if it's bothering you emotionally and psychologically, then you have a nose job in the Becker nose in the 1950s, because you can't live looking in the mirror at that nose. And there's truth in that, isn't there not? I mean, emotional damage is just as difficult as physical damage. Just can't see one.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
that's why they say
Right.
it's hard to draw the line.
Uh-huh.
Let's keep going, okay? Another lovely reader.
quote the
You
second
could-
part of the She'elah.
I'm sorry.
Where are we?
I missed
Where are
it.
we?
Oh, did you want me to keep reading?
Yeah, well, I'd love to have you read.
Okay.
So, the second,
Oh, I
okay,
thought you went-
I'll be quiet while you read. Interrupt you. This suggests,
Okay. This suggests a difficulty that confronts us as we approach the second part of the She'elah. What do we say concerning tattooing and body piercing, particularly their more extreme forms when these are not done as part of a medical procedure? We cannot reject them merely because they serve no medical purpose. It is an accepted custom in our culture to pierce one's ears for purposes of adornment and unification, and our committee has written that such is permissible according to Jewish tradition. If so, then what is the essential difference between ear piercing and the objection of the sorts of tattooing and body piercing?
aha, that's a good question. Keep going.
If these practices differ only as a matter of degree, on what principle basis do we permit the one and forbid the other? And if we do declare the latter to be forbidden, can we be confident that our religious language is anything more than a smokescreen behind which one generation or group within a society seeks to impose its own standards of beauty, decorum, and taste upon those who do not share them?
Wow, that's a nice, yeah, the fact that they raised the suggestion that it might be just a smokescreen behind which we hide our distaste of contemporary culture. Lisa, keep going. By the way, do you all know Lisa? This wonderful Lisa? A product of BJBE as well as the Steiner family. Product of young Judea, also over the years. A product of Israel. A good White Sox fan.
That makes her super.
Some people live with difficulties. Okay, I'm sorry, Lisa, go on.
These are indeed serious criticisms, but we must weigh them carefully against the demands of Jewish tradition, an obligation we take with the utmost seriousness, that we treat our bodies with reverence. Torah prohibits us from engaging in Kabbalah, from subjecting our bodies to needless physical damage, because to do so is to violate the dignity and sanctity that we created in the divine image have been endowed. It teaches us that we do not own our bodies, rather God has entrusted them to us for safekeeping, and we are responsible to God for what we do with them during our lifetime. It is our duty to honor our bodies, to keep them healthy, safe, and whole to the best of our ability. When we practice tattooing, body piercing, or any other act of permanent physical alteration, we do not honor our bodies. Instead, we engage in an act of hubris and manipulation that most surely runs counter to the letter and spirit of our tradition. True, actions otherwise forbidden as Kabbalah are permitted for medical purposes, but from this it does not follow that they are permitted for any and all purposes. On the contrary, the fact that our sages have to cite arguments to justify Kabbalah in the name of healing suggests that they do not extend that permit to acts of disfigurement undertaken for the sake of adornment or self-expression.
Okay, questions on that? You get what they're saying? And
I get what they're saying, and I have a question. And my sister eyebrows had almost disappeared, and so she had her eyebrows tattooed. And I'm now reading this, is that contrary because she did it for physical adornment, or it wasn't adornment, she felt it was a necessity? So where would that fall into the rubric here?
5149,
Yeah,
probably.
yeah, probably.
She should send her own response in, except she doesn't want to.
No, she did her PhD.
Arthur, then Harvey.
It's the same thing as in a real, it's a normal part of the body to have eyebrows, so you're just restoring
Yeah.
what should have been there in the first place.
Good point.
Good point. Makes some sense.
I was gonna say the same thing from a, you know, it's without having eyebrows, it's disfigured. You know, so you're correcting a disfigurement.
Thank you, but good answers. Okay, let's go. Similarly, anybody read similarly?
Okay, here.
Yes, Paula.
Similarly, the fact that ear piercing has gained acceptance as a cosmetic practice in our society simply means that some acts that might, in theory, be defined as Kabbalah are not so regarded by most of us. It does not mean that we must accept any and all sorts of bodily alteration as legitimate. We realize how difficult it is to distinguish in this case between the permissible and the impermissible. To do so requires that we make judgments that are inescapably contestable. But Judaism, like religion in general, is all about the making of value judgments. Our task as Jews and as students of Torah is thus to arrive at those value judgments that reflect our most coherent and understanding of Judaism's message. And that message teaches us that there is a difference, a vital one, between cosmetics and disfigurement. The physical alteration of the human form, whether through cosmetic surgery, tattooing, or the piercing of its organs, is an act of degradation rather than adornment. I can't read the rest.
To disrespect rather than
honor. To cut into our flesh for the sake of enhancing our appearance is to display arrogance and contempt toward the one who created the human form, to say to the artisan, how ugly is this vessel that you have made. Very interesting.
Okay, I think that I think we can skip this next paragraph, because I really want to get these next two in. And I think this is fairly repetitive. Let's jump down to let us consider, therefore. Someone? Paula, want to go on?
Okay. Let us consider, therefore, what sort of statement we make about ourselves and our bodies when we inject pigment into our skin, when we pierce our flesh with needles, wires, studs, and spikes. Yeah. Let us ask ourselves whether this is truly the way that we Jews, commanded to pursue and to practice holiness, should aspire to beautify and adorn ourselves. Let us reflect with the utmost seriousness upon the values we proclaim when we engage in such practices. When we think about them in this Jewish manner, we begin to realize that surely we can aspire to something better. As Jews, considering this question from the vantage point of our tradition, we ought to perceive the extensive physical alteration of the human body when undertaking without medical justification as Kabbalah, an act of destruction undertaken for no good and worthy purpose, an act that symbolizes the sorts of violence that we work to banish from the world in which we raise our children.
We acknowledge that all such conclusions are subjective. But the third time they've expressed some doubt. And laced with ambiguity. It is virtually impossible. But this is very honest, too. It is. By the way. It is virtually impossible to draw and advance a sharp line that will determine whether any particular case of physical alteration is to be accepted as adornment or rejected as Kabbalah. We do not attempt here to present a catalog of specific forbidden and permitted cosmetic procedures. Can you imagine that would be like a Pesach foods list? You had the yes, the no, no certain size, no certain. This is okay, but that's not okay. We do suggest, however, that in general, tattooing and body piercing conflict with our most carefully considered understanding of a Jewish tradition. Okay. Well, to conclude, we're not going to be surprised at the conclusion, but somebody can read it.
Tattooing is certainly permissible as an element of reconstructive surgery. Judaism requires that our bodies be treated with honor and respect. Therefore, while we recognize the importance of personal adornment, as Jews we must pursue it in the light of the historical Jewish emphasis on the integrity and holiness of the human form. Tattooing and body piercing, when not a part of a legitimate medical procedure, are most difficult to reconcile with that emphasis. They are Kabbalah, pointless destruction of the human form. We do not and cannot regard them as adornments. Unless and until we are otherwise persuaded, we should continue to teach that Judaism forbids these practices as a negation of holiness, the pointless and unacceptable disfigurement of the human body.
So we're going to have a protest on, what's the big street of tattooing? Is it Fullerton, where all the tattoo places are? Belmont. Well, put some signs and say.
Right.
Sure. But we're not gonna do that.
Now, what about ear piercing?
Yeah,
It sounds like the conclusion was saying that ear piercing was against, prohibited. And I thought you said that it was, I was confused.
I know. You're right. They're all, you have caught it. They're also confused. But what they've said is that in an earlier response, and I'd have to go to find that one, they say, we said that ear piercing was acceptable. You know, we didn't think it was great, but we wouldn't say, no, you shouldn't do that.
And what's the difference between ear piercing and like belly button piercing?
Well, one is here.
or nose piercing. Nose
No,
It seems to be any different.
Lisa, write that response.
Yeah.
Write that question, because the, what, here's my, you should all have suppliers.
Oh, yeah.
Should have drugs there for him? Cough.
Teacher's pet.
Ear piercing is.
Yes.
So everybody wants
Yeah.
Kim Novak.
Make relationships in your life, and it all comes back to
Here, here.
I know. She's.
But Kim Novak is not Jewish, is she?
No.
Oh, looks terrible.
That was terrible. That was Botox.
well,
Kim Novak.
I think it was.
I have a question.
Oh, she
Goldie
disfigured.
Hawn.
Bad
Goldie
question.
Hawn. Everybody wants.
they didn't want her to wear that dress. I thought it was pretty nice.
Sorry.
Who are you talking about?
Phyllis.
This
Academy Awards.
response seems to be about
Academy.
15 years old.
Academy.
Is this the most recent response on this issue?
I think so. It's in the publication, but there's also a list of more contemporary on the CCR website, and there's nothing more about this so far. This was the most recent. You know, they're not.
I would think that in future years, it might change.
To be more liberal.
I would think.
I sort of think so too. Look, most of us are against it, okay? Anybody change their mind about doing this?
But ear piercing is acceptable.
Very
But, and they don't set out against ear piercing here. They just say, it's dubious. I don't, there's a confusion there, I think. Wait a minute, where was I? Oh, questions. Most of us are against it. So what I want to suggest, or ask, is our against based on Jewish tradition? Is it based on or is it based on something? Is it based on culture around us? Is it based on some kind of a visceral reaction? Or is it based on something else that tattooing seems to suggest to us? Okay, so a few responses. Okay.
I never had read this prohibition before, therefore, any negative feelings I had on tattooing result from World War II and the fact that Jews had numbers tattooed on their bodies.
Thank
That's
you.
the visceral.
Thank
part.
you.
That's the visceral.
Thank you.
That was my point.
Yeah. Arthur?
Two things, they should take the money that and it's expensive to get these big tattoos, and do it for tzedakah.
Maybe they do both.
And the other thing is, I could just see a bunch of 19th and 17th century scholars say they should be studying Torah instead of wasting their time doing this frivolous thing. So the real Orthodox would probably throw that out too.
As well as the biblical.
Right.
comment, etc. I have two other thoughts. And Sue.
How did they ever get down to discussing something as trivial as ear piercing.
Surreal?
It's trivial as ear piercing.
Falls in that
Well,
category.
you know, in Orthodox law, if you're making an exception to a traditional law, I sort of think it's trivial, but I don't know the answer how to get to that. Somebody asked a question.
Does this all come out of the Talmud as opposed to the Torah? Or is it in the Torah?
The further interpretation does, but it's all based on that Torah. Let me suggest two possible things. Number one, I don't think our initial reaction is based necessarily on stated Jewish tradition, though I think Jewish tradition is in there someplace in an unconscious way. Tattooing numbers. Tattooing numbers and violence. There is a kind of violence in what's done to the skin, what's done to people, and the overall impression of the act of tattooing seems like an opening for the violent part of people. That's emotional on my part. Okay. The other thing is, I think it does still have elements of idolatry. Idolatry of the body, but I need to make my body better than somebody else's. That there is a sense that God isn't God, and that how we are should be changed. And that someplace to change yourself that significantly somehow goes against something that's pretty deep in us. That's my thought. Yeah.
Building on what we learned last week, would he, applying to the rabbinic school, having a tattoo,
Wow.
would that disqualify you as a candidate?
If it's not
And
visible.
who would do the exam?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, let's say you have something on your shoulder and it would not necessarily show.
Yeah.
Would they even ask such a question? It's something to think about. If that's
No, it's a
the
wonderful
rabbinic,
question.
if that's a reform point of view, obviously it is. And our leaders are supposed to be models of our behavior.
As we talked about last
Right.
week.
Then this question comes up.
Right. Doing the priestly blessing with sleeves. You know what I'm talking
It's a
about?
bit tacky.
Okay, right. There's a crocodile giving me a blessing. It's a very good question, and I'm sure that it's going to be asked again. If not by you, then by your students. Okay.
What happens if nobody notices and he becomes a rabbi and then someone notices?
Right.
Should
Show
he
by
get
the
kicked
beach.
out? Yeah, right.
It hasn't been tested yet whether it's something to keep a person out of the rabbinate, but I bet it's been talked about already. Certainly among students. Who are marrying Jewish girls or boys who are tattooed. And does it go to the spouse also? Look at all the room there is. Isn't it great to live in this world where there's more questions, or spawn more questions, and you have to study more things? Okay, I'm through with this. Are you through with this?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the messianic.
Jews for Jesus. I seem to get, I'm on their mailing list. or something.
How did you get there?
But I'm
The temple, when the temple's location on Milwaukee Avenue, as I'm sure you know, started out being a Baptist church, very right-wing Baptist church. Forget what its name was, but right across the street of Milwaukee Avenue. And then it turned into a Messianic Jewish congregation, which bought it. And
Could you sit closer to the microphone?
Yeah, thank you.
Or bring the microphone closer.
Or is it on?
Can you take the microphone off?
Is it on?
No, just bring it closer.
Is the mic
Your
on?
body,
It's on.
is your body
It is on.
okay?
oh, well, you should have asked them to speak for a while. How's that?
Yeah,
Much
that's
better.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, but I'm getting a throat examination.
We're getting
Yes, I'm
old.
hearing aids.
Okay. Our synagogue has suffered a tragic fire. The community, especially the non-Jewish community, has been supportive on many levels. Local churches, some of them evangelical, have contributed to our rebuilding effort. Recently, we received a significant check from the local Messianic Jewish congregation. Do we return it? Or do we accept it with gratitude in the same way we have accepted funds from other Christian groups? Question comes from Rabbi W. in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Well, how many say, take it, then say thank you?
That's the Jewish thing.
How many say you gotta send it back? Okay, well,
Ask him first
What?
why, since we're of opposite ends of the spectrum.
well,
Is it just of good faith, or do they have some strings attached there somewhere?
well, that's what we're gonna talk about. And they, of course, don't say, but we try to figure it out. Now, there are two people who take this, in this room, who take the side of the response, and that is Sherry and I. So,
You're in good company.
yeah, but we can get outvoted. Okay. See, getting out from the microphone. All right, who's going to hand these out, please?
Oh, you got it. Okay. I already needed the exercise.
What are you talking about? You're picking on me.
Don't rag on our, I'll tell you. Mistake. His daughter is a fine Jewish educator.
I'll be your best friend if you give me a cookie.
Can we get some in the back row?
No.
I'm getting there, I'm getting there.
I thought he was passing him out.
I'm thorough.
Thank you. Thank you. Rabbi, is this, what are you talking about? This brings to mind.
Not the same.
Yeah.
I have a question before.
Have we got a problem in handing these out?
This brings to mind the humanistic Jewish group as well. Similar. Should we accept?
They're Jews.
Yeah.
Humanistic Jews are Jews.
Right. My question is, if the Messianic building burns down, would we give them a donation? I don't know.
We have to do this question first. It's where do we take their money or would we give them?
Okay,
We
we're
only have
taking
another
it.
hour.
Right. And if there's, arson is always a little bit questionable.
Yeah, I'm not getting into this.
Well, I'm not going to do that. Okay. Here we go. But, let me tell you just a speck, because it's interesting, about our experience in the congregation with the Messianic Jews, and mine especially, the one that was across the street in Milwaukee. They had a gentleman whom they called their rabbi, and I went over there one Saturday morning just to see what was going on. And I sat in the back, And I don't quite remember what they did, but it was sort of faux, F-A-U-X, Jewish. I mean, they said the Shema in a funny translation, and they sang in Elohim, but there was a lot about Jesus. And they read a Bible passage. I don't remember whether it was the Torah passage of the week. And at the end of the service, the faux rabbi said, "I'm so pleased to see that Rabbi Shapiro from BGP is sitting in the congregation." I thought I had gone incognito. Sharp people, they do with everything. Anyway, we had an association of clergy of Glenview, and included all the clergy of Glenview, all the denominations, and we even got the Mormons, a Mormon temple, and there was one of the first times the Mormons in the area had decided to be with other religious groups and send some of their semi-clergy. And then this rabbi, faux rabbi, decided he wanted to be part of the ministerial association. And people said, well, okay, he's a rabbi. And I suggested that it would make us the Jews very uncomfortable, and me too, because he really wasn't a rabbi, and his congregation was masquerading as a Jewish congregation. And so the ministerial association, I was a little disappointed in them, said, well, no, we accept everybody. And they said, but we'll have a special committee look into it, and you could be on the committee. Okay. So we had a meeting in the committee, and I tried to explain to them why Jews would be so upset to have a masquerading congregation, one that did not tell the truth about itself. And they said they were still a little dubious. And here's what it. And then somebody said, well, what about the Mormons? And suddenly the clergy, the Christian clergy, sort of turned around. Because they had a sense that Mormons to them were like Messianic Jews to us. And how would they feel if the Mormon minister, or the equivalent of a minister, wanted to be in the association? And they were not so sure that, so it's like the Mormons, right? And I can see the kind of prejudice against Mormons in that Christian group. I think that's when we, I'm not sure what, the issue, like most issues, faded away. Somehow he didn't want to come. Okay. I just like to tell that story. So, there we are. All right, and now, here we go, Messianic Jews. We need a reader. Lynn, please.
Messianic Jews, along with the Jewish members of such similar groups as Jews for Jesus, are apostates, Mamer, Jews who have abandoned Judaism for other religions. The religion of the Messianic Jews is not a version of Judaism, but a fundamentalist Christianity, and it does not cease to be Christian in essence and character, merely because it is draped in the Hebrew language and Jewish religious symbolism. The Responsa Committee based itself upon Jewish tradition and an evaluation of the challenges that confront our community today, has long advocated that we approach apostates with a policy of strict separation, tempered with openness.
Pulling over one hand, pushing away.
Apostates should not be accorded membership in the congregation or treated in any way which makes them appear as if they are affiliated with the Jewish community. They are not permitted to lead communal worship, to address the congregation, to be counted in the minyan, or to receive synagogue honors such as an aliyah to the Torah. This separation is necessary in order to make 2 points. First, that it is inappropriate for those who have renounced Judaism to participate in our religious and social life as though they remain Jews in good standing. And second, that their decision in no way constitutes a legitimate Jewish religious choice.
Same time. Maybe more than it should have.
What? We cannot and should not.
And should not exclude these individuals from attendance at services, classes, or any other activity of the community. For we always hold the hope that they will return to Judaism and disassociate themselves from Christianity.
Let's keep going. Another reader. Tell
How
us.
does this policy apply to the issue of gifts by apostates to our synagogues? Jewish law deals in some detail with the question of donations to our religious institutions by those outside of our community. Gentiles, for example, were permitted to donate certain sacrifices to the ancient temple. Accordingly, since many of the rules relating to the synagogue are derived from those that govern the temple, the rabbis determined that it is permissible to accept donations from Gentiles to our synagogues today. By contrast, the apostate who rejects Judaism wasn't permitted to donate sacrifices to the temple, for by his actions he had separated himself from the community of Israel. Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, one of the authors of the Shulchan Aruch, draws the analogy from temple to synagogue. Just as the Mumar was not permitted to donate sacrifices, so we do not accept synagogue donations from apostates. This comparison, however, is rejected by Isserlis's 16th century contemporary, Rabbi Moshe Trani, who declares that prohibition against accepting donations from the Mumar applied only to sacrifices and other appurtenances of the temple, that it is therefore permissible for a synagogue to accept a gift from an apostate. Subsequent halachic writers do not clearly resolve this dispute. It isn't certain, therefore, that the halakha would prohibit the synagogue from receiving this gift.
Okay, there's the note here that I think was important. Note 10. Do we have it?
Number 11, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Under certain conditions. Writing of a that's all. Pardon. That's almost a way of doing repentance. Giving to write a Torah scroll, almost a way of being repent and turning oneself around. Almost. Okay. Okay, so therefore, it's hard to find anything in Jewish law that says don't accept a gift from because it's not the temple. Hard to find it. However, on the other hand, I'll read. There is another perspective from which we might consider this question. That perspective is Geneva Da'at, the prohibition against deceptive speech and behavior. Messianic Judaism, in its various guises, is based upon such a deception. I think that's true. It promotes the false impression that Christianity is a legitimate form of Judaism. It preaches that a Jew who adopts that religion does not abandon Judaism, but rather becomes, and this is their word, a fulfilled or completed Jew through the acceptance of Jesus as Messiah and the personal Savior. This false message communicated through the very name of the group, as well as through a series of deceptive practices. These congregations conduct their worship services in something of a Jewish style and structure. They celebrate the Jewish holy days. They call their spiritual leaders rabbis. Such practices make Messianic religion look Jewish, thereby blurring the very real distinction between Judaism and I'm skipping a little bit. This quality of deception, moreover, sharply distinguishes the Messianic Jews, this is important, from other Christian denominations. For while those other churches may seek to preach the gospel to the Jews, they neither mimic Jewish practices nor present their faith as a form of Judaism. Conversionary attempt, a comment by me, conversionary attempts therefore, we're not so happy about, but they are acting in consonance with their honest belief that they should. And they are not pretending to be anything other than evangelists who are seeking conversion of us. Your acceptance of this donation will be interpreted by many in the community as an acknowledgement of the religious legitimacy of the Messianic Jewish movement. This acknowledgement would amount to a reward paid by the Jewish community to a group whose very existence preserves a calculated deception aimed at our people. We should not pay them such a reward. That's pretty combative, isn't it? Pretty combative. Somebody else. Now the last end, please. Somebody, Susan? Susie.
We say this with no feeling of bitterness toward those Jews who have affiliated with Messianic congregations. Though they have found a religious satisfaction in Christianity that for some reason seems to have eluded them in our synagogues, we do not wish to drive them away permanently. On the contrary, they remain our fellow Jews, our brothers and sisters. As we have said, we welcome them to our services and other congregational activities. Our doors are always open to their return, but our openness to them does not require that we affirm their religious choice, a choice that effaces a line separating us from Christianity and that defines us as a distinct religious community. We recognize that Messianic Jews may sincerely believe that belief in Jesus Christ is compatible with Judaism. Yet from our perspective, a perspective born of and educated through centuries of religious life and experience, that doctrine is a falsehood, for it runs counter to everything we believe and know about the faith and tradition we profess. To present a falsehood as though it is the truth is the essence of deception. And a falsehood is still a falsehood, even if those who proclaim it regard it to be true.
For these reasons.
For these reasons, we think it best that your synagogue refuse with all due thanks the donation from the quote Messianic Jewish unquote congregation.
Okay, so we'll see what the dissent has to say. Here's our member of the committee who doesn't agree.
One member of this committee disagrees with this decision and is persuaded that the synagogue may accept the donation. In this member's view, the Messianic Jewish congregation should be treated as other Christian evangelizing groups in this regard. The Talmud makes a distinction regarding the intent of gifts from non-Jews. Clearly, a contribution primarily designed to win legitimacy and potential converts in the Jewish community comes with idolatrous intent and would be forbidden. Since these contributions come in response to a tragic fire, possibly arson, in the synagogue. However, it is possible to assume that the Messianic Jewish congregation gives, as do the other congregations, to demonstrate broad support for the synagogue among all religious communities in the area. The gift, if offered mipnei darkei shalom, to advance the cause of peace, should be accepted in that spirit. The majority of our committee believe that the groups known as Messianic Judaism should be treated as apostates, for such is how they present themselves, rather than as non-Jews. We also believe that, given the deceptive nature of their religious program, any contribution from a Messianic congregation would be made with the desire to win legitimacy and potential converts in the Jewish community and should therefore be rejected.
By the way, you're aware that about 3/4 down, that's the response of the majority to this minority opinion. Right? Okay. Anybody convinced one way or the other to change opinion? Yes.
What if an individual known to be a member of that congregation gives a person of the Messianic Jewish, whatever they call themselves, decides to give a donation as him or herself personally, but they're an apostate? In other words, they're not giving it in the name of their church or whatever they call it, but they're giving it in their own name. How would that fit into this paradigm?
My guess is because that's not an organization.
Okay.
I think they would have to treat the individual differently. If not, it would be a witch hunt.
And it reminds me of the many, many, many years ago when you discussed from the Bema on Glenview, in Glenview, about an offered or a proffered gift from someone who was not necessarily engaged in a legitimate practice, but nonetheless wanted to give money to our congregation. Do you remember that? It was a really long time
I was
ago.
gonna bring the same thing up, Sandy.
You remember that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
somebody, very wealthy guy.
Yeah.
He's got millions to give us. His business was taking advantage of other people or whatever, morally not right, and he's in jail now. But he still wants to give us several $1 million. Will we take it? Do we look at, or it's a gift? Take the money.
Either my memory is gone or that's a dream of yours.
Susie remembers.
I would take the money, I wouldn't name the building in his name, but I would
Is
take
that-
the money.
is that an overview?
Is it made up?
No.
Exactly.
Yeah. We have had highly,
Millions did that.
we have had in its early years highly disreputable lawbreakers, terrible lawbreakers, as members, and even close to founding families in the old BJ. They were just about out of things by the time I got there, though not completely.
So the response, are they inferring that the money should be denied because they're in fear of being infiltrated by these Messianic apostates
no,
who want to convert?
No, it's giving them
They're concerned that it gives the wrong idea that they make themselves legitimate, which in no way are they legitimate. Now, I think this is an idealistic and in a way, an idealistic, unrealistic response, because if you ask the ADL what to do, the ADL would say, are you going to get the Christian community in an uproar? How could you not accept that? So I have a feeling in the congregation would be finding it very hard, Sherry, to agree with us. Very hard. But that's the principle. They're not seeing, and I feel that way about Messianic Jews and all the Jews for Jesus congregations too. Jews get to decide who's Jewish. Christians don't get to decide who is a Jew. And that's what we decided. And you can disagree, but you're not legitimate. Okay, anything else on that? No, Susie?
Do you know the background of the formation of the Messianic Jews? I mean, we know the leaders and the prophets that started various religions. Did someone start this? I mean, do you know how it came about? Because it seems to me there are a lot of young members, very young, I mean, younger than all of us. And when I'm walking down the street and someone is proselytizing, I want to scream out and say to him or her, does your mother know what you're doing? You know, or you should be ashamed of yourself. But in this day and
You're
age.
much younger than to say something like that. much to do.
Well, it gets me, it really does.
Yeah, but that's different. I mean, that's, that's the traditional Jews who going down the street and trying to get people to put on tefillin.
In this day and age, I certainly wouldn't do it, but I feel as if I wish to do it.
Any other new comments on this,
I
Arthur?
think this is a funny story. This is about Jehovah's Witness. Arnie Hirsch is the rabbi's Machatenis, and very good friends of ours, and they lived in Oak Park. And the Jehovah's Witness came to the door and said to Arnie they'd like a contribution. And they said, what would you say to God if you were in heaven? And Arnie said, Shema Yisrael Adonai. And the Jehovah's Witnesses said, we don't understand. And Arnie said, but God would. And he closed the door.
Very
So
good.
I thought that was
great.
so brilliant, you know.
Excellent.
Okay, and the last, any more?
I just have a question.
Please.
Maybe you can answer this one. Northwest Suburban, conservative congregation right in our neighborhood. Building was totally torn down, and it's a Catholic church. They built this edifice building that is unbelievable. And on the side of the new building, they hung a Torah scroll with a shofar.
Image.
Real one or?
No.
Image.
Outside, no, outside, on the side of the building.
Not a real Torah.
No, it's a bronze.
A bronze.
Well, they're
Where
recognized.
is this, Lynn? Where is it located?
It's in Morton Grove.
In Alliance.
Northwest Suburban
Catholic
is
church.
Morton Grove.
Morton Grove.
Well, that's what
It
I
is
said,
Morton
Morton Grove.
My husband has a cousin, first cousin, that's been a part of Jews for Jesus almost her entire life. She has a Jewish mother, not a Jewish father. And whenever they speak, she lives in California, she is quoting Isaiah, and she is trying to impress,
Yeah.
and it's gotten so that Bob doesn't want to talk to her anymore because it's just, she's trying so hard to convert Jews.
But this,
And she's been involved in this for maybe 50 years. So.
I mean, I was literally blown away. You see the edifice of this church, I mean, it's literally.
And they probably think it's an interfaith gesture.
Yeah.
As a way of saying this used to be a synagogue.
That's right, it's a recognition. It's okay.
Like the old
And
buildings
and it says more about us, maybe than it does it. They think, it's a nice thing. What does that mean? They probably
We
don't
thought
think.
maybe it was hung, somebody thought it was hung over from the synagogue, but it wasn't there when we belonged there.
Okay. Next, we'll try and do this. Okay. A man who is approaching death, this is getting heavy. A man who is approaching death is instructed that his body be cremated. His children are very uncomfortable with this request. Very realistic. They are asked whether, under Jewish tradition, they are obliged to honor it, or are they entitled to bury him intact in contradiction to his expressed wishes. Rabbi Solomon B. Freehoff has ruled that in such a case we apply the Talmudic dictum, it is a mitzvah to fulfill the wishes of the deceased. I wonder, however, says this questioner, if a more nuanced approach is better suited to a case such as this, where the children have strong religious objections to their father's instruction. Okay, I just want some opinions, and would you say the children are entitled to go against the father's instructions because of their great feelings against cremation? How many say they are entitled to go against? How many say they're not? What Papa says rules. Okay, and and how many people feel okay about cremation? How many do not? Now, of course, that question has the division of, do you feel it's okay for you only, or do you also extend that to the whole idea? Okay, so now we see that, and here we are, and this is a long one, but I'm going to cut out some sections so we can hopefully get at the meat of it. I will try and govern my mouth.
No, it's giving. Oh, so
You've done so well, you can split it down.
When you have, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, y'all have? Y'all have? Joan. Harvey.
Yes, sir.
Joan.
I have.
Oh, you do, sir. Sorry. Okay. All right, yeah, we're gonna finish this one by 11:30 and get the meat of it anyway. Okay, we had the question, now here's the answer, one answer anyway. Our reader, I'll go. In the responsum that our Shoel mentions, Rabbi Freehoff, many years dead, but the master of responsa in the Reform movement years back, said we should urge the family to carry out a father's wishes. He acknowledges that the principle, it's a mitzvah to fulfill the wishes of the deceased, is not absolute. And we're in fact forbidden to fulfill the wishes if he instructs us to commit a transgression against Jewish law. Thus, an Orthodox rabbi would surely rule against the request. However, since the question has been posed to a Reformed rabbi, the answer cannot be so clear-cut. That's our curse and our blessing. For us, cremation does not necessarily contravene the laws. The laws, for the CCR said, in case we should be invited to officiate at a cremation, this is 1892, we ought not to refuse on the plea that cremation be anti-Jewish or irreligious. Rabbi Freehoff notes there is no clear and obvious prohibition against cremation in the sources of Jewish law. Interesting. And that the Orthodox agitation against cremation actually began about a century ago. In response to the growing movement toward cremation in Western society, when one studies the Orthodox arguments against cremation, one can see that they are forced. On this basis, Freehoff concludes that Reformed Jews can have no principled religious objections to cremation. Jumping down to the middle of the end of the next paragraph. For these reasons, we hold that the children, in this case, may well be entitled to act upon their own religious beliefs and not their fathers. Okay. Well, we have to learn a little bit about cremation in Jewish law. Okay. Because I'm going to jump, I'm going to keep reading and tell you where I'm jumping. There is no explicit requirement in the biblical text that the dead be buried rather than cremated. The sources make it clear that burial was the normative practice in ancient Israel, but nowhere do we find express prohibition of the burning of the corpse. The rabbis understand burial to be a requirement of Torah law. A few lines down. Yet, like the Bible, the Talmud and the classical halachic literature contain no explicit prohibition of cremation. Okay, so that jumping down to that same paragraph, about 6 lines from the bottom. Second, another reason, Jewish tradition mandates kavod hamet, the honor due to the dead, that we treat the corpse with honor and respect, and in regard to the burning of a body as an act of nivul, hamet, contemptible treatment of a corpse. Other arguments include the prohibition against imitating Gentile customs, which seemed to have been cremation, and the contention that cremation is tantamount to an act of heresy in that it denies the belief in Tchiat Metim, the physical resurrection of the dead. Interesting, right? You burn the body, how is it going to be resurrected?
Messiah comes.
That's right, yeah.
The great scholar Saadia Gaon said, however, that if God can bring back a body that's dead to life, God can do the same thing with ashes. God is very well able to do the same thing with ashes or body parts. So who can offer that as a traditional argument anyway? These are, okay, so that's traditional. Cremation in the literature of the CCAR. I'm going to keep going because I'll let you in a moment. This 1892 resolution, how long ago? 122 years old. That's older than anybody here, right?
Yeah.
The 1892 resolution declares that in case we should be invited to officiate as ministers of religion, we ought not to refuse on the plea that cremation is anti-Jewish. That's what they said. However, the 1961 Rabbi's Manual, down in D, says that since that time, most Reformed Jews have gone beyond this cautious tolerance and have accepted cremation as an entirely proper procedure. A number of leading Reformed rabbis have requested that their bodies be cremated. And the manual contains a suggestion for recitation when the body is to be cremated. D, now getting much more contemporary. Gates of Mitzvah, a guide to Reform Jewish life cycle observance. This just lists the changes in Reform thinking over the years. This is evidence. It says that while both cremation and entombment in mausoleums, which was not a Jewish practice, are acceptable in Reform Judaism, but burial is the normative Jewish practice. That's the way you start to make shifts, right? E, the CCR Response Committee in 80 says the resolution remains unchecked. In this generation of the Holocaust, this to me is important. We are sensitive to terrible images associated with the burning of a body. Very much like what you said on the tattoo issue. Therefore, rabbis may therefore choose to discourage the option of cremation. Practice remains permissible, however, for our families. And the argument moves on again. F, the current Rabbi's Manual says, time out of way of Jewish disposing of the dead. Let's see. Once they say they don't like it, but down toward the end of F. If, however, cremation has been decided on by the family, we should not refuse to officiate. It is suggested in such cases that the service be held at an appropriate place and not at a crematorium. Wow. Well, there are some crematoria, mainly Christian, mainly used by Christians. Yeah. And finally, in 1990, now that's closer to us, says Reformed Jewish practice permits cremation, although we would, after the Holocaust, generally discourage it because of the tragic overtones. The record of these statements suggests a perceptible shift of attitude. Down at these threads of argument. Okay, somebody take up for a while. Down at the bottom of what, page 197, these threads of argument.
These threads of argument, in turn, reflect two important transformations in the way that many Reformed Jews have come to think about their religious lives and decisions. The first has to do with their positive re-evaluation of tradition. In the past, the fact that a particular observance was traditional or accepted Jewish practice did not in and of itself recommend that observance to reform Jews. Indeed, we were quite ready to dispense with any such practices that were not adapted to the views and habits of modern civilization, and that failed to impress the modern Jew with the spirit of priestly holiness. It is for this reason that R. Felsenthal could argue both that cremation was a transgression against traditional Jewish law and that this fact was irrelevant to Reform Jewish thinking on the subject.
That was early Reform Judaism, right? Rabbi Bernard Felsenthal was rabbi of Sinai congregation here in the early years. Okay, somebody go on to many of us, skipping a few things. Yes, Natalie.
Many of us have reclaimed ritual observances abandoned by previous generations of Reformed Jews. From the generous use of Hebrew in the liturgy, to the wearing of kippah, talit, and tefillin, to the dietary laws of kashrut, to the ceremony surrounding marriage and conversion. These examples and more could be cited testify that our approach to traditional ritual practice differs significantly from our predecessors. The difference stems, no doubt, from the divergent religious agenda that we have set out for ourselves. If our predecessors regard their acculturation into the surrounding society as a predominant objective, we who benefit from the social and political gains that they achieve are more concerned with taking active measures to preserve our distinctive Jewishness. Thus, where they may have viewed many ritual observances as barriers to social integration and as an obstruction to modern spiritual elevation, we may find them an appropriate and desirable expression of our Jewish consciousness.
That's a wonderful paragraph, kind of a short summarizing paragraph about where Reform Judaism has been these past years, and why too. Okay, now we're going beyond that, and we're going to page 200. And we're going to make it. Well, we're going to make it. The second transformation. I'm going to keep it. No, somebody else. The second transformation. Please.
The second transformation in our religious thinking concerns our sensitivity to the experience of the Shoah of the Holocaust. There is, to be sure, all the difference in the world between Nazi crematorium and the freely made choice of cremation for ourselves and our loved ones.
Okay, Arthur, we're going to save some time because it's clear what this is going to say. It's been said already.
Right.
Jump down to we emphasize, would you please?
We emphasize that we are dealing here with general trends. To speak of transformations in our religious thinking is to describe what is happening within large segments of the Reformed Jewish community, rather than to prescribe a correct course of action in a specific instance. Not all Reformed Jews are affected in the same way by these trends. Not every Reformed Jew will draw from them the same conclusion concerning his or her religious observance. As a noted jurist once remarked, general propositions do not decide concrete cases. Yet in this particular concrete case, the conference has moved decisively away from its previous acceptance of cremation. The members of this committee reiterate this stance, although we, like our more recent predecessors, continue to acknowledge that the 1892 resolution remains the formal policy of the CCAR. We would continue to call upon our rabbis to discourage the practice of cremation among our people. We do.
Okay, let's stop there, and we're going to go to the end, and I'm going to go. We're still on 20.
Okay.
No, 201. The 1892 resolution, about 4 lines in, 4 lines down in A. Therefore, the children are not forbidden to honor this request, and they may arrange for cremation in response to the mitzvah to honor our parents and the dictum that we should seek to fulfill the wishes of the deceased. So they could do it. B, never, nonetheless. Nonetheless and nevertheless, what good words those are, right? Yeah. The children are not obligated to honor their father's request. It discourages the choice of cremation, supports the choice of traditional burial, and Reform, though today recognizes the right, jumped on. The commandment to honor one's parents does not apply in such a case. The parent is not entitled to compel his or her children to violate their sincerely held Judaic principles. Thus, when a Reformed Jew has serious and substantive objections to cremation, he or she may refuse a loved one's request for it. Okay, and indeed, because it's also important, it is essential that families speak about such matters openly, honestly, and before the approach of death. When the child fails explicitly to say no to a parent's request for cremation, can you imagine the difficulty of that? Think about this is hard. When to cremate me, Charlie, and Dad, I can't do that. Hard. Unless you've had a good conversation early on about that. Parent will just, in such a case, the child quite likely has made an implied promise. Therefore, if the children have objections, they should make their feelings known to the parents sooner, much sooner, rather than later. So have you learned a little bit about cremation? You use attitudes toward cremation in this?
You know, the two things, I know you can take an urn, put it into a cemetery.
Yeah, casket.
But a lot of people scatter the ashes.
Yes.
And to me, the nice thing about being buried in the ground, it's somewhere to go to and
That's
put the
right.
stone there.
That's the whole
and
idea.
That's
a Jewish philosophy.
Yeah.
Have somewhere to go.
Yeah, and we were with the rabbi and Hannah, years ago we went, and we were in Auschwitz, and the beautiful young Polish lady said, people don't believe, they say it didn't happen, and she bent down, and she picked up the ashes, remember? And she said, see, these are real ashes. You could feel the grittiness of the bones. And my brother was cremated, and I said, Larry, I wish you would do that. No, that's what I want, so they did it. And it just, when I think of it, I think of Poland.
And what was that lady's name?
Oh,
I remember.
what?
Dorota Zak.
Dorota Zak.
She came with us twice.
Twice she came.
Yeah. But I thought that was so good, how she bent down and
Yeah,
picked
she
up.
was terrific.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that there's one other thing here, which is, I think that cremation is terribly, terribly frightening for a child to understand. Just can't imagine, no way of explaining that. And of course, we deal now with the environmentalist movement, which is generally is a movement we agree with. But in general, they're saying it. And the other, and one last thing. Rabbi Larry Kushner, and I've quoted him too often, once said, if you give instructions to your family about what has to happen after you die, it shows that you don't understand the concept of dying.
That's right, control it.
Right. You don't, it means you let go.
That's right.
That is in your, and that is, other people have now the world. And you have to, that's all. Okay, I have 1 and 2, and then we're.
I have a friend who lives in Las Vegas, and they may design, people are starting to die and stuff, and almost all of the people that she knows are being cremated because it's so much cheaper.
Yeah,
It's
cheaper.
Thank you.
Hey, but if you don't have the
We hadn't
funds,
put that into
I've
the
heard of
mix.
that.
Oh,
Because
this
it's
is just
cheaper.
a joke that I heard. Just to end it off, a woman goes to a rabbi and she says, I'd like to be cremated when I pass away. And the rabbi says, well, that's not really in the Jewish religion, but a lot of them are doing it. And I want to make one specification. My ashes are to be thrown over Neiman Marcus. He says,
That's where her money
that's
is."
unusual. Why do you request it? That way my daughter-in-law comes to visit me every day.
That's cute.
And they told that story about Memorial Park and Saks. It's Skokie.
Yeah.
Right across the street.